If today feels more steady, but also slightly demanding, like you need to show up again for the same thing you chose yesterday, this isn't random. Commitment is being reinforced. Yesterday, you chose. You narrowed your focus. You selected direction. You decided where your energy goes. And today, you're asked to return to it. Not once, but again. You may notice that nothing dramatically new is appearing. No major shift, no sudden change, no new direction pulling your attention. And that can feel different, less exciting, less stimulating, but more real. Because this is where building begins, not through new choices, but through repeated ones. You may feel a subtle resistance today, not because something is wrong, but because repetition requires discipline. Doing the same thing again, showing up again, staying with what you already chose, without the initial excitement of discovering it. And that's the shift, from choosing direction to proving it. You may also notice that your awareness is sharper around effort. You see where consistency is required, where attention is needed, where your energy must be placed again for something to actually grow. And that awareness can feel slightly heavier, because now it's not about deciding, it's about doing. So if today feels steady but slightly demanding, like you're being asked to show up again for the same direction, it's because commitment is no longer an idea, it's becoming action. What you're experiencing today is not stagnation, it's consolidation. When you first choose a direction, it exists as clarity, an understanding, a decision, a sense of alignment. But clarity alone doesn't create results. It needs repetition, because repetition is what turns direction into structure. That's what's happening now. The energy is no longer expanding outward, it's moving inward, stabilizing what you've already chosen. You may notice that your actions feel familiar today, not new, not exploratory, but repeated. And that repetition can feel less exciting because the novelty has passed. But this is where real progress begins. Because when something is repeated, it becomes consistent, and consistency creates reliability, not just in what you're doing, but in how you do it. You begin to refine. Without thinking as much, without questioning as much, without needing to adjust constantly. And that refinement is what makes direction stronger. You may also notice that your awareness is shifting, less focused on options and more focused on execution. How you show up, how you engage, how you maintain what you started. That's the transition from choosing to building. And building requires presence, not intensity, but consistency. Showing up again, even when nothing new is happening, even when there's no immediate reward, even when it feels simple. Because this phase is not about excitement, it's about stability. And stability is what allows growth to hold. So what you're feeling today is not a lack of progress, it's progress becoming structured. This is where today becomes critical, because repetition is simple, but not always easy. You may notice a subtle resistance to doing the same thing again, not because it's wrong, but because it's familiar. Because the initial clarity, the excitement of choosing, the sense of newness has passed, and what remains is consistency. That's the first trap. Breaking consistency too early, looking for something new, shifting direction, changing your approach before what you started has had time to stabilize. Because repetition can feel slow, and when something feels slow, it can feel like it's not working, even when it is. So instead of staying with it, you move away, and that breaks the structure you were beginning to build. The second trap is pushing too hard, trying to force progress, doing more than necessary, overloading your effort, expecting immediate results from something that needs time. Because when you commit, there can be a desire to accelerate, to prove it quickly, to see results immediately. But structure doesn't build through intensity, it builds through consistency. And when you push too hard, you create instability. You burn out your energy. You disrupt the rhythm that was starting to form. There's also a subtler pattern today, questioning the simplicity of what you're doing, thinking it's too basic, too repetitive, too small to matter. And that doubt can lead you to change things unnecessarily. But simplicity is what creates strength, not complexity, not constant variation. So the real calibration today is steady repetition, not breaking what works, not forcing what doesn't need force, just continuing, with awareness, with consistency, with enough patience to let something build. Because what makes today powerful is not what you start, it's what you continue. So how do you stay consistent without burning out and without drifting away from what you chose? You stabilize your rhythm, not by doing more, but by doing what is already enough. Because today is not about increasing effort, it's about maintaining it. Start by returning to what you already did, the same action, the same focus, the same direction, without adding unnecessary variation. Because repetition is what builds structure, and structure is what holds progress. You can also regulate your intensity. Not every day needs to feel strong. Not every action needs to feel significant. Consistency is not built on peaks, it's built on stability. So keep your effort steady, sustainable, repeatable, something you can return to again without resistance. You may also notice that your mind looks for change, for something new, something different, something more engaging. But today, that's not what creates progress. What creates progress is staying with what already works, even when it feels simple, even when it feels repetitive, because that's what allows it to deepen. You can also build small checkpoints, not to question everything, but to stay connected. Ask yourself, am I still aligned with what I chose? If yes, continue. That's enough. You don't need to adjust everything constantly. You don't need to optimize every step. You just need to stay present in what you're doing and let it build. So today, keep it simple, keep it steady, keep it consistent, because that's what turns commitment into something real. Let everything settle here. Not to slow your movement, but to stabilize it. Because today was not about doing something new. It was about continuing. And continuing is what creates structure. So, take a breath. Steady, controlled, unforced. And notice what remains when you stop looking for change. There's a rhythm here. Not intense, not dramatic,
but steady. And that steadiness is what builds progress. Because what you repeat becomes reliable. What becomes reliable becomes strong. And what becomes strong begins to grow. So not everything needs to feel exciting. Not every step needs to feel meaningful. Some of it is simply repetition. And that repetition is what creates results over time. So, as you move forward from here, keep returning to that. What did you choose? What are you building? Stay with it, not once, but again and again, without interruption, without overthinking, without needing to change it constantly, because that's what makes it real. Not the decision itself, but what follows it, the consistency, the presence, the willingness to continue even when nothing new is happening. So, carry that with you, this ability to stay with what works long enough for it to become something more. And if this helped you feel more grounded, even slightly, return to it as your direction continues to build. And if you want to keep moving through these shifts with more awareness, more control, you can come back here, each day, not to start over, but to continue what you've already begun.